There's a crisis happening with our youth today that I don't believe anyone is talking about. Yet it's the common denominator in 67% of youth suicide, 90% of homelessness and runaways, 71% of high school dropouts, and 75% of drug and alcohol abuse. What's the common denominator? The absence of a father. You see, 18.4 million children, that's 1 in 4 in the United States, are growing up without a father in the home. Now that's a crisis. When dad's not involved, the odds are drastically stacked against the child. Yet when dad is involved and at home, there's a lower rate of obesity, mental health crisis, and low school scores and performance. In other words, statistically, dads matter. So I believe I have the answer to this crisis. It's a movement predicated on a simple yet profound mission to turn disengaged dads into nurturing fathers. Now, you may be wondering, what is a nurturing father, Corey? Well, in order to answer that question, I had to take you back to my childhood with my dad. My dad is a nurturing father, but that wasn't always the case. When my dad started his fatherhood journey, he did like most dads did, flew by the seat of his pants and figured it out as he went along. And that worked for him up until one day. He was sitting with my brother at the time, my older brother, and they were having breakfast together. My brother was 6 years old. And my brother accidentally spilled the milk for his cereal as it went from the table to the floor. My dad instinctively reached out to save the milk, like most dads would. What would happen next would change my dad's fatherhood journey forever. As dad instinctively reached out to save the milk, my brother flinched in preparation for the next hit or smack. My dad froze. This wasn't the way, he said. I can't do this. I can't let fear and abuse be at the fabric of my relationship with my son. So dad went on a journey to figure out how to be a better dad. So he went out looking for any resource he could find. Found lots of tools for mom, lots of topics for parents, but nothing for dads. So my dad did the next thing he knew what to do, and he wrote his own. And so in 1998, my dad penned the Nurturing Fathers program. It was the roadmap that my dad never had, a collection of tools, guidelines, resources for dads with one common theme: everything without fear of violence. Now, over the last 25 years, this program's been all over the world. It's touched every race, ethnicity, culture, economic background. It doesn't matter. Thousands of people have walked in as dads and have graduated as nurturing fathers. As you can probably tell by now, I'm really passionate about this topic, but I wasn't always passionate. As I was growing up, I didn't really care much what dad did. I didn't understand it until that day I became a dad. Then I realized very quickly how challenging yet rewarding this job could be. So in 2014, I took my first Nurturing Fathers class, but I hadn't quite yet totally got the bug. That wasn't until a year later I got a call to facilitate the program behind the wall. Now, the wall is a mile-long structure, 40 feet high, that surrounds the Atlanta Federal Penitentiary. So as you can imagine, when I got this call, I was petrified. I thought of every excuse in the book not to do it. Until one day, I got the courage up to ask my wife if I could go to prison. She looked at me strangely, and then after she figured out that our life insurance was fully in place, she said, "Go for it." And so a few weeks later, I found myself walking through the wall, through the gates, into session 1 at the Nurturing Fathers program at the Atlanta Federal Penitentiary. When I walked in, I saw 15 men, all from different backgrounds, all serving different sentences, but all there on their own accord because they wanted to be better men, they wanted to be better fathers, and they wanted to make sure that their children didn't make the same mistake that they made. I knew after session 1, and it sounds weird, I was home. They became quickly my family. I knew I was safe. These guys would make sure that nothing would ever happen to me. And since then, I have facilitated 8 Nurturing Fathers programs over the last 8 years. And every week, I get to attend that program as the highlight of my week. I want to share with you a few of my all-star participants from the last 8 years. The first one is Reggie. Reggie was one of my first participants, and Reggie always had a smile on his face. Reggie, when the conversation got still, Reggie be the first one to jump in. Reggie was a military man, 7 years, multiple tours in Iraq. And when he got back, he got in some trouble. And when he left for prison, he had 2 sons and 1 on the way. What I learned about Reggie is there was a thing in his household called pow-pows. Now, pow-pows were hits or smacks that the kids would get when they get in trouble. And this was generation upon generation. Reggie's dad would do pow-pows, Reggie's grandpa pow-pows, so on and so forth. Until one day we were in class together, and I asked the question I ask in every class: do you want fear and violence to be at the fabric of your relationship with your kid? And Reggie wrestled with that question. And during that week, he had 1 phone call he could make, and he made it to his wife, and they had a conversation about pow-pows. A week later, he runs up to me in front of the class. He says, "Corey, guess what?" I said, "What's up, Reggie?" He said, "No more pow-pows." So what do you mean? He said, "From this point forward, no more pow-pow. My household, there will be no more hitting." It's like, wow. And he said, "You know what? Generation upon generation in my family, there won't be any more pow-pows." So every time I see Reggie, week in and week out, I greet him with "no more pow-pows," and he'd say, "No more pow-pow." Next is Devin. Devin was a giant of a human being, like 6'7", just commanded a room, strong, everything you think of, just a giant, intimidating inmate. And he was a father, and he was around 65 years of age. And at this session, we were talking about the history of our fathers, what we call our father wound. And as Devin spoke, he talked about his baseball passion in high school. And he had 144 baseball games. And he said to the group, he said, "My dad went to 14 of my baseball games." He said, "My last baseball game was the most important. That was the state championship. I wanted Dad there so badly." Every inning after inning, he looked up in the stands. He saw no Dad. Tears coming down his face. The strong man crying like a baby. Everyone in the room crying. After he wiped his tears away, he looked at all of us and he said, "Just do what you say you're going to do. That's half the battle of being a dad." He's so right, Devin. You're so right. And then the last one is Charles and the gentleman. Now, each week I give the men an opportunity to share what's going on at home. And this gentleman had a major issue going on with his daughter, all about his 6-year-old daughter and her not sharing her toys, specifically Mr. Waddles, the penguin. Every single time Mr. Waddles would come out, all hell would break loose in that household. She'd smack, she'd kick, she'd fight, she'd go crazy. It would embarrass the dad, embarrass the mom. It was a terrible situation for him. He was very frustrated. And so as he's explaining the situation, Charles, who went into prison at 19 years old for a drug charge of 23 years. He was 50-something now at the time of this time. So he'd spent more than half of his life in prison. But he did, every year he mentored men. He was just an amazing human. And so when Charles would lean forward in his chair, you knew Charles had something he was going to say that was going to be profound. Charles leaned over and he said to the gentleman, he said, "Well, I think I have an answer to your problem." I said, "Okay, so can I ask you a question?" And the gentleman said, "Yeah, sure." He said, "Let's just pretend for a second that I came to your house. My daughter's Samantha, and we came over for a play date." I said, "Okay, so Samantha and your daughter go off and play, and you and I are having a conversation." Gentleman says, "Okay." Charles says, "Then I ask you if I could borrow your car. Would you be okay with that?" Gentleman kind of looked at him strange and was like, I guess. Yeah, that's fine, Charles, whatever. He goes, well, what if I asked you if I could borrow your house? Guy got a little bit more awkward. He's like, no, I probably wouldn't let you borrow my house. Then he said, would you let me borrow your wife? As you can imagine, at prison, got real quiet real quick. Gentleman got a little red. Charles, no, you may not borrow my wife. Clearly frustrated. Charles said, okay, I understand. Charles leaned over and he said to the gentleman, that's how your daughter feels when Mr. Waddles is taken. That's her prized possession. So what I might suggest next time is that you take her prized possessions off the table. Little Mr. Waddles gets put away. The other couple important toys get put away, and then the rest of them are up to play for. But just remember, those toys are her sole prized possession. She cares about them, and that's why she protects them. We were all floored. He got us again. And I can tell you that those play dates went a lot better after Charles's advice. The reason I can tell you that is that gentleman was me. And my daughter is in the audience right here. So I am not just a facilitator of the program, but I am also a participant. I learn so much every time I go through it. I want to end my talk with just some of the core principles of being a nurturing father and what we share in the classroom. One is we seek to be active listeners. So we're not just listening, dads, to give advice. We love to fix things as dads, but what they often want us to do is just listen and to be understood. And so oftentimes we have to turn off the fix it button and just turn on the listen button. We practice power to, not power over. We give our kids the choices to make the right decisions. We don't scream and yell and tell them what to do and demand what they do. We help them build the problem-solving muscles so that they can make their own good decisions and not always have us towering over them. We play. Dads are great at play. We double down on our strengths. We build rapport. We build strong bonds with our kids with play. We think before we act. We don't overreact because we pause before we act with our children. So if our kid is 2 years old and they're throwing a temper tantrum in the middle of the supermarket, our first reaction might be, oh my gosh, I'm embarrassed. He's humiliating me. Everyone's looking at me, blah, blah, blah. That's not what's happening. It's 2 years old. It's the only way he knows how to communicate. And every person in the store has probably been through the same thing. That's what we think, so we react accordingly. We pay attention to the good just as much as we pay attention to the bad, if not more. When they do something well, we celebrate with enthusiasm. More so than when we see something bad, because they're going to do what we pay more attention to. And we often praise for everything that they do well, that we see. Because let me tell you something, you hear a lot about, don't coddle your kids, don't praise them too much. Look, they walk out these doors, I promise you, they're getting the negative out there. We need to build them up. We need to give them that foundation. We need to tell them we love them. We need to tell them we're proud of them. I can tell you, every man I've sat with in every class has all said the same thing. I wished I'd have heard I love you. I wished I'd have heard I'm proud of you a little bit more. I want to end my talk, first of all, to acknowledge a couple people in the room tonight. My beautiful wife, Jessica, my son, Milo, and my daughter, Talia, right here. Talia let me wear my favorite shirt tonight, which I'm really excited about. And I do just want to say to two of you, if I haven't said it enough, I'm proud to be your dad, and I'm proud of you for everything that you guys have done and for that to come. And to the young men that are in the audience tonight, we're at Georgia State here. If and when you get the opportunity to be a father, I hope you dive head first, and I hope you become a nurturing father. And to the rest of the group here and anyone who's watching, I hope you help us join the movement, because we can truly change the world one father at a time.